Alright, so in this video we're going to be learning how to create a table of values from a function using Microsoft Excel. So let's start out with the first example, some simple function, let's say a linear function. So for my example 1 in this video lesson, let's say we're going to be, our function here is f of x equals 2x minus 3. Right. And so the whole idea about table values, once again, we're gonna have a, and keep in mind again, this function here has the domain. The domain on this function is all real values from negative infinity, to positive infinity. And so the reason I mentioned about the domain for any of these functions, because now when you create your table, then we can just simply pick a list, an organized list, first of all, of x values traditionally. And there will be no x values to be excluded from the domain here. And so in that way, I can just create, starting with -5, -4, -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, and so on and so on. And then the output values for the function is going to be the y value column, which is going to be whatever we're filling in here, and we're going to let Microsoft Excel calculating these values. So here you are in your Microsoft Excel here, and Microsoft Excel I'm using here is version 2010, which is quite old, but all functionals are working the same way. All functions and all features working pretty much the same. And so you don't need to worry about if your Microsoft Excel is having a different version with what I have here. So a brief understanding about Microsoft Excel is that Microsoft Excel, in each of your spreadsheet, that we can enter values in columns or in rows. It's just a choice of your favorite, whatever your preference is. My preference is I'm gonna input the values in a vertical column right here, just like how we had on the papers and pencil table. And so I'm gonna have let's say I'm gonna designate a column for the x value, and then it's just like the way how we are doing with the papers and pencil. So let's keep the x value table on the left hand side. So my first column here, whatever column that you want to start out with, we pick one column. And so I'm going to start out with that, similar to the table I've had. The first value is -5. So we just type -5. And then the next value is -4. We're going decreasing of the negative. And then -3. Now, Microsoft Excel is actually smart enough to, once you have entered about 3 consecutive values, we can just simply go back to the first value on the same column, click on that, and hold down and drag. Now notice, you click in the inner area of your cell right here, your cell entry, click and hold, and drag down to highlight. And now once you've had that, then after you highlight your data area, we can release the mouse click and then move your mouse cursor to that little corner, and notice how it changed right here. The mouse cursor is going to change to a little thin plus sign. Now at that point right here, click down and drag further down. You see how it's moving right there? And as you drag down right there, if you keep dragging down, and it's going to create a sequence of all of those. Microsoft Excel is going to be creating the entire sequence of all of those values that going consecutively. And you can see that we start out with -5, -4, -3, and now Microsoft Excel can automatically generate these other consecutive values for us. Okay, so those are intended to be our x values. So now here's how we get to the y values. So the y values, we can enter that here to the right hand side column. And so remember that I gotta remind everybody that our function, the formula rule for our function is for every input x, the function is gonna do 2 times the input x minus 3. And then that's how we're gonna tell Microsoft Excel, that's what we're gonna tell Microsoft Excel to process, to create that function that process our inputs that we're putting in the column A right here. So now in my column B, this is what I'm doing. Starting with the very first entry corresponding to the input -5 on cell A1 right here. Then right here in my column B, after clicking on that and highlighting it, I'm actually gonna use my mouse and move to the command line entry line right here. And click on that, and now I have a blinking cursor right there in that command entry line. I'm gonna hit equal. This is the way how you open up how you create making Microsoft Excel to process as a function right here. So always start out with an equal, and here's your command right here. Your function is 2 times the input. So time is we're gonna use an asterisk for times or multiplication. So 2 times the function says 2 times the input. So I'm going to open up parentheses. Anytime that we are doing functions value substitution, it's always the best idea to put your substituted value into a parentheses, a pair of parentheses. And so the input value this time, where do we obtain the input values? The input values are those values on the X column, which is now in Microsoft Excel, it's the A column. So right now we're staying at B with row 1. So your input value is on row 1. So now I'm going to use the mouse, and remember, no click right now. All clicks are released. All buttons are released, no press. I'm going to move my mouse over to A1 right here, and I'm going to just simply make 1 click on that. And that means it tells me now that this value is going to be the value in entry B1 is going to be calculated as 2 times whatever the values that happened in A1 right here. I'm going to close my parentheses, -1. Actually, my function is -3. And so after I double check and ensure that my function setup, my function formula here is consistent with the function we start out in our example, now go ahead and hit enter. And now you can quickly see that after we hit enter, the cell moved to a different entry right here, and now the value in that particular cell B1 is now -13, which is exactly the output value of your function f at -5. And so now we don't have to retype that again for because we have a long table waiting ahead right here. But the good news is that we do not need to do the equal and then type in the formula again. Here's what's powerful about Microsoft Excel right here. I'm going to go ahead and go back to that entry B1 where I had my first automated calculation value right here. I am going to move my mouse cursor once again to that corner again, so that the mouse cursor will change to a thin plus sign. I'm going to once again click, hold down, and drag, just like that, and drag it until I reach the same length of my column in A. And now once I hit the same length, I'm gonna release that, and it's gonna become A. And now we have a table of values, so we can double check now. But -11 is exactly equal to the function value of f of x when x equals -4. And you can double check again with your own calculation. But -9 here is the function output value when x equals -3, and -7 here is the function output value when x equals -2, and so on and so on. And so if you desire to have a longer table, then you can go ahead and get back to your x table, highlight first, just simply you click and remain your cursor to be this full fat plus sign, click, and then hold down and drag. That's to highlight. And once you highlight, you can once again turn your mouse cursor to that little lower right corner of your highlighted area where the mouse cursor change to the thin plus sign, and then we click, hold, and drag. And keep dragging further, and it's going to produce further consecutive x values. And then here, we can, once again, we don't need to highlight in this area actually, because the function is already automated. So we can just go ahead and move the mouse cursor to that lower right corner, where the mouse cursor once again change to that thin plus sign, click, hold, and drag. And now you're gonna keep having longer table over here. And that is how we are creating a table of values for our first function, f of x equals 2x minus 3, using Microsoft Excel. And so one more thing I would like to share with everybody in this same example. Now, if in case any of you are actually would like to reach some better details about your function, here's a couple of refinement. So on the same function here, here's what you can do. I'm going to highlight all this, and I'm going to erase it out. We're going to pretty much repeat the same process right here. But you can notice that commonly or traditionally, we are using mostly the integer values here, a lot of time, very commonly. But then in case that any of you would like to find out and curious about, can Microsoft Excel do the same thing, the similar thing, but using even all of those decimal values, it sure can. Let's say, but you're gonna have to be a little more careful and cautious with the way how we're entering it. So I'm gonna highlight the whole area and just hit the delete key to completely clear out my table and reconstruct my table from scratch again. So here I'm gonna start out choosing column A to be my designated column for the x values. And now let's say, yes, it's completely fine to start out with a whole integer value here. Let's say negative 10. Okay. Then, but now we want to go decimal. So let's say, how about here in my example, I'm going to go by a decimal with every jump about a 0.5 jump. And so after negative 10, the next larger negative with a jump of 0.5 is a negative 9.5. And then the next jump with a 0.5, the next negative number with a jump 0.5 is going to be a negative 9. And then with just simply 3 values, Microsoft Excel is going to be able to detect the rest of the pattern. And so we're going to once again go back to the first entry, click, hold, and drag to highlight, click, hold, and drag, and then move the mouse cursor so that it changes into the thin plus sign, and now click, hold, and drag again, and keep going as far as you need. Alright, and so now you got up until like a whole lengthy table of values, but and ending at x equals 2. If it's not long enough for your need, you can once again, with your currently highlighted area here, once again you can click, hold, and drag with your thin plus sign, click, hold, and drag further, so that you have a nice table with a very good refinement of the values. And then same way I'm going to go on the right hand side column, which is namely column B in this Microsoft Excel screen. Once I hit my first entry B1, I'm going to move to this command entry line right here. I'm going to type equal to times open parentheses. I'm going to, for this entry right here, I'm going to take corresponding input value from entry in A1. I am going to close my parentheses and -3 again. And now there you go, my first value. And now I'm going to go back to that entry, highlight the entry, click, drag, and hold that thin plus sign, click, drag, and hold my mouse straight down until I hit to the end of my table. And now I have all of those values going correspondingly with my x inputs value. So that's how we can build a table of values from a function using Microsoft Excel. Alright, and then in a different example, let's say I'm going to call this now example 2. I'm going to do this same thing, but my function here, I'm going to call it g of x to be, so this function g here, take input x. What the function does to input x, it's gonna square every input x and plus 2 to it. And so this function of yours right here that you're looking at is a quadratic function, and once again the domain of this function here that we have learned, the domain of this function is once again of all of those x values in real numbers, or in interval notation. It's from minus infinity to positive infinity. And once again, the reason I mentioned about domain is that now you can just construct a table of values without any worries regarding finding which value we need to exclude from our table of values. And so your table of values can just simply be, once again, I'm going to start with x being some negative, -3, -2, -1, and 0, and 1, and so on and so on. It's just a planning before we hit over to Microsoft Excel and let it handle the rest. All the y values to represent the output values of your function are going to be going into these entries right here. Alright, so once again, here we go back into Microsoft Excel. I'm going to take my column A, or whichever column you want to start out at first. We're going to pick that as our X column. So my first value I'm going to be using -3. The next value, -3. The next value down is -2, and then -1. And now once again, we feel free to highlight it, then turn the arrow into the thin, turn the plus sign into the thin plus sign, and wherever it is right now at that highlighted area, click, hold, and drag, and go as far as you want to create a nice sequence of all the consecutive values. And here once again, I'm just going with all the whole values, all the integer values. So now my B column is going to be designated for the Y values. So here in my first entry corresponding to row 1, the first X value. So in my entry B1, I am going to move my mouse to the command entry line right here. Click on that, and I'm going to go equal. So it's permanently the way how we telling Microsoft Excel to start getting ready for a function. We have to start out typing an equal sign. And so now my function, once again, to everybody have a look into your function one more time before we can completely getting it to Microsoft Excel. This function is telling us to square every input and then add 2 after we square, order of operation. And so I am going to open up parentheses because the inputs are those values from the column A right here. So now I'm gonna tell Microsoft Excel that in this particular entry I am going to take the input first, take the input from column A1. So I'm gonna, after opening parentheses, I'm gonna click on A1. Just click on that, and I'm gonna close my parentheses. So after taking the input, the function is going to square the input, and then after squaring, we are going to add 2 to the input, and now hit enter. Now we have a value, an output value for that particular input, -3, and then you can, before we proceed too far, you can quickly double check with your calculator that -3 all square is a +9 plus 2 equals an output 11. So now once you agree with, and Microsoft Excel gave outputs that's consistent with our understanding, then once again, right here, change your mouse cursor to a thin plus sign, then click, hold, and drag straight down. And now we're gonna have a series of values, a sequence of value with all the nice values that came out corresponding to the outputs in the corresponding inputs value X right here.